This is TWiT.
Today, Facebook posted a list of 7 difficult questions a social network wrestles with and how it deals with them. Joining us to give us some context to the Facebook announcement is Josh Constine from TechCrunch. Welcome back to the show, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what did you think of the questions that Facebook started out with?
Yeah, I think they really do address some of the biggest issues facing the company, though the question is really whether these questions are being designed just to let people know that Facebook is thinking about them and kind of absolve it from some guilt or give it a reason why it's moving so slowly, or whether it's really trying to solicit real feedback from users to help it solve these problems.
That was my first, I can be kind of cynical, although I'm trying not to be, but that was my first thought about this. It's just sort of corporate responsibility, kind of look at this. We're going to write, 7 paragraphs, only one of which most of you will read about these topics. But I mean, they are really interesting questions. And Elliot Schrage, he's the vice president for public policy. He posted this and he said, these are the questions that Facebook debates every day. Do you think there was something about right now that made them decide to ask public feedback about these questions?
I think ever since the U.S. election, it's definitely been grappling with these issues, and they've gone from being sort of like philosophical questions it asks itself when its engineers and product managers are sitting on the couch to something that they're getting asked about every day, all the time. And so I think it's become a lot more important that they actually put out some information about them. But for me, I think that they really do want to solve these because they know that right now they're actually approaching 2 billion users at this point. And I think when they hit that, it's going to add a little bit more scrutiny about what is the responsibility of running a social network of this size and going from being a cool startup or a fun website to being a core ubiquitous utility that's part of the communications infrastructure for the entire planet.
Yeah, you mentioned almost 2 billion users. It's right around, I think, 1.8 billion users, very close, closing in on 2 billion users at this point. And then your Facebook, you open up all of these incredibly important questions for your 1.8 billion users to answer. How on earth does a company like Facebook even manage to tackle like even a small percentage of all of that feedback? I just don't know how actionable this is when there's that much noise.
Totally. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're not soliciting feedback on Facebook itself. What they did was they provided an email address where if you have questions that you think it should be asking as part of this set of hard questions, or you have feedback on solutions, you can email it with your input. But they didn't want to do this on Facebook because otherwise having such a low barrier would probably lead to a lot of really low quality submissions. Yeah. But it's funny that you say that. It's really about that scalability. And that's the same thing that they're trying to address here, because they know that they can't just have human moderators looking at all of these problems whenever there's content reported. So today, Facebook put out a big post about terrorism and how it counters terrorism. And most of it focused actually on artificial intelligence and the ways that it's using AI to combat this so that it doesn't have to rely entirely on its own staff. And that includes in doing image matching. So if they take down a piece of terrorist propaganda and somebody else re-uploads the exact same thing, it'll get blocked because it's sort of been fingerprinted, and they're sharing those fingerprints across other companies like Twitter and Microsoft and YouTube. Meanwhile, they're using natural language processing and language understanding to be able to say, hey, this is what it looks like when somebody's advocating for terrorism, and they're able to then train their AI to go out and hunt down that kind of text. But I think it really comes back to this big issue that at 2 billion users, any solution that Facebook puts forward to make its site better or provide a better experience to users has to be extraordinarily scalable without much human input. Otherwise, it's just too costly for Facebook to provide.
Yeah, that question of terrorism or using AI to judge people's Facebook posts versus their behavior, I think is a really difficult one. I mean, the man who shot at the congressmen who were playing baseball, he's reportedly had these long, scribes on Facebook, just, spent a ton of time on there just writing a lot of stuff. And only once did he say something about, we've got to take this into our own hands or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact quote. But, I mean, he's not the only one writing really long things on politics on Facebook, like the woman who lives down the street, my uncle, everybody's. So, how do they even begin to decide, who's the person that is going to then go and shoot congresspeople at a baseball game? And is it even their responsibility to try to figure that out?
Personally, I think it is a responsibility of them to figure this out. They want to be this open technology platform rather than this editorialized media company. But the fact is that if they want to have a set of core values that they abide by, if they want to be able to be family friendly, if they want to be able to court advertisers, they're going to have to draw the line somewhere and make these judgment calls. But really, I was hoping that this series of blog posts, these hard questions, was going to be examining more of the philosophical questions behind this. Like, where do you draw the line between saying, hey, this is someone just voicing a really contrarian opinion or being a bit of a rabble-rouser, and this is actually dangerous, and this person may incite violence or actually take violence into their own hands? And where does Facebook figure out how to draw the line on that? And I was hoping that it was going to bring up those issues and ask for input on it. But instead, the first post on terrorism was really just a list of methods of how Facebook does it. And they actually didn't even include that feedback email address until I pinged them on Facebook and commented on Elliot Schrage, their director of public policy, asking, hey, why isn't even this feedback email address on your post? It's supposed to be soliciting feedback, and they actually eventually added it, and they're going to add it in all the future blog posts. But it made me really wonder, is this just Facebook trying to put a good spin on all of these problems and say, look at all the ways that we're tackling it, look at all the ways that we've thought about it? Or is it really trying to move the needle forward and say, this is what we can do better, or where are we failing, and what can our users do to help?
Yeah, that's been kind of primarily one of my questions as well. I feel like for the longest time, especially kind of late last year, we got kind of used to the Facebook word being, don't worry, we know what we're doing. It's okay. You guys are blowing this way out of the water. We've got it under control. Now we've kind of seen them edging more into this direction of admitting that, wow, there's 1.8 billion users. This is like uncharted territory. What is the actual effect of this many people on a single service? How much power do we actually wield over those people and influence over them and thought and all that kind of stuff? Is this basically a sign of Facebook kind of, I don't know, showing a little weakness of sorts in the fact that they actually don't have a great understanding of the power that they wield with those numbers?
I wouldn't say this is a weakness, and rather it's sharing that it's vulnerable. It realizes that it's not infallible, that it can't do everything right, and that there are big questions that people are asking in their heads, and that if those questions are allowed to stay in the dark, they're going to fester, and people are going to come up with their own conspiracy theories about, oh, why haven't we seen anything that Facebook's doing about this, when Facebook might be doing plenty behind the scenes, but if it doesn't talk about that and make it well known, people may just assume the worst. Yeah. But really, I think it's okay that it's showing its vulnerability, and that's one of Facebook's biggest opportunities here. Is so many tech companies, they're really, they're living quarter to quarter trying to survive. They're trying to show that they're going to make it, and they're trying to put up that invincible front. Facebook is doing so well. They're making $4 billion in profit a quarter. They're just killing it. And because of that, I think they're allowed to have a little bit of leeway to say, maybe we're not doing everything right, but we're going to really try hard to fix it. And I think that that's an advantage and something that other tech companies could learn from. Because what happens is, if you pretend like you don't have problems, you end up like Uber, where suddenly it all blows up in your face.
Yeah, good point.
I'm really interested in how they're going to answer these other questions. One of the other one was, how can we use data for everyone's benefit without undermining people's trust? I mean, how do you think they're going to, any ideas about how they might answer a question like that?
I think almost all the answers, almost all the questions, the answer is transparency. They just want to know, people know that Facebook's using their data. They know that the users are kind of the product and the advertisers are the users, because it's the users' data that's getting sold to those advertisers, essentially. But I think what Facebook wants to do is put as much of it out in the open. And, now they have these ad preferences in the settings panel of Facebook, which really shows you a lot about what Facebook knows about you, what kind of buckets you're in terms of advertisements you receive, and you have some control over blocking some of those advertisements. So I think Facebook knows that the more it can talk about this stuff and make people aware that it realizes it's not perfect, that the more they're going to accept its transgressions. But yeah, I think the question is, how does Facebook use people's data without undermining their trust? That's going to be a really difficult question because so much of Facebook's business is reliant on that kind of data. So I think what Facebook isn't necessarily saying like, we're going to make a ton of really big changes that are going to affect our core business, as much as saying we're cognizant of these problems. But hopefully, a lot of people do really have this crazily negative view that just because Facebook has gotten so big that it's necessarily malevolent. And I think Mark Zuckerberg, giving $45 billion of his own money towards this philanthropy vehicle that he's set up, and with his 6,000-word community letter, and the fact that he talked about things sort of going against Trump's rhetoric, talking about how we need to build bridges instead of walls. Like, I think the company itself actually does have a pretty good heart. And I've been covering the company for 6 years. I've written 2,000 plus blog posts about the company, interviewed hundreds of their employees. A lot of them really do seem to have the user's best interest at heart. But the question is, can they put those users first even when it means hurting their business? And so hopefully if Facebook's targeting and advertising policies are what's jeopardizing user trust, they can figure out how to get in there and make people trust it without necessarily cratering their company.
I agree. And I do think they are getting better at this. I mean, it used to be so difficult to find the privacy settings and know when your post was public or private. But I continually, all my posts are just public. That's just what I do. I've given up. And I continually get little, that little cartoon that says, did you know you can change your settings and everything doesn't have to be public? And so, that's nice. It's very user friendly and, good for people who want more privacy. So I agree with you. I think that they are trying to change.
That's really sort of the kicker on a lot of these questions is that while they seem really user positive, things like, how are we going to use people's data while not burning their trust? In the end, that's really positive for Facebook because people post when they feel confident about their privacy. When they know exactly who that post is going to, they're more willing to share more sensitive and personal content that often makes the most engaging stuff on Facebook. And so Facebook has to actually win that trust for its business to survive. So while you might think that this is sort of a balance between, is this good for users or good for Facebook? A lot of times the things that are good for people end up being good for Facebook if it waits long enough.